Welcome, friends. We have gathered here on this beautiful day and in this lovely room where Kit spent many happy hours in this place she cared so much about to celebrate the life of Carolyn Staley, Kit. We've come to feel the sorrow that we can't help but feel at her death, to surround her family with our love, and to take comfort from each other in facing the loss that we're feeling. But most of all, we've come to remember a smart and spirited woman who challenged us to live out our values the way she tried to live hers. Kit admired the opening lines of the prologue to Bertrand Russell's autobiography. 3 passions, simple but overwhelmingly strong, have governed my life: the longing for love, the search for knowledge, and unbearable pity for the suffering of mankind. We see those passions reflected in her life, in her commitments to her family and friends, to education and achievement, and to social justice. In remembering her, we can lift up the gifts of her life and carry them on in the world. So thank you for coming to remember with us today. The Flaming Chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. We light it at the start of each of our services, and it's often understood to represent the light of truth and the warmth of love and the fire of justice. So we light the chalice today in honor of Kit's long membership here at Mainline Unitarian Church, and in honor of the light and warmth and fire that she brought into the world. Anne Morrow Lindbergh wrote, "We are not snuffed out at death, but absorbed into a greater flame." Today, as we remember Kit, we celebrate her life and the life universal that holds us all. The Unitarian minister Betty Baker once wrote in a sermon, "When I was young, I used to sit on the front steps at dusk, and I used to wonder whether twilight was the ending of the day or the beginning of the night. And then one evening, I realized that time is a cycle, so there can be no beginning and no ending. And this is when I came to understand that birth and death are one. And it is neither the coming nor the going that is of consequence. What is significant is the beauty of the interlude we call life." We're here today to reflect on the beauty and significance of Kit's life, her interlude between birth and death. But we can't do that without acknowledging the reality of death itself and the sense of loss that it brings. Whenever we gather for a service like this, we know that we come together from our different lives, from different backgrounds and different experiences and different faith traditions. We may have, within this one room today, many different ways of thinking about and understanding life and death and their mysteries, and that's okay. We each need to hold close those affirmations of faith that bring us comfort and strength. And we need to remember that at times like this, the various faiths that sustain us as individuals come together in a harmony that cuts across all creeds and reminds us of the permanence of love and hope. Because it's in that spirit of love that we gather today, and we know that love never dies. But death brings us face to face with mystery. And it also reminds us that we're all part of a larger whole, that we're connected to each other and to everything that is. We know that death is part of the natural order of things, that we all are born and we all must die, and we all live our lives in between, trying to make sense out of it all. Kit loved the natural world. Her time at 3 Mile Island Camp was so precious to her. with the deep connection there to nature and her beauty. She respected the natural cycles of life and death. She wasn't afraid to think ahead about her own death, telling her children what readings and music she wanted for this service. The naturalist John Muir wrote about what he called the beautiful blendings and communion of death and life, their joyous, inseparable unity, as taught in woods and meadows, plains and mountains and streams of our blessed star. He affirmed that death is as beautiful as life, that all is divine harmony. So today we affirm our trust that Kit is part of that divine harmony, however we may understand it, in death as she was in life. As we remember her together today, we'll be hearing a lot about her and her life and what it meant. First, we'll hear from members of her family. And then, if time permits, we'll have time for others among you to stand and share a memory or a story with us. So as you listen, if something that you hear reminds you of something special about Kit, hold on to that thought so that you can share it with us in a little while. But first, let's hear from some of the people who knew her best. And I will turn things over to her son, Peter, now.
Thank you, Libby, for those beautiful remarks. This turnout is heartwarming. Got to give my mom credit here. Her timing was impeccable. She waited until we were all double vaccinated, and for her beloved Unitarian Church to reopen. All of us knew someone who died last year. Most of us do. And we knew families and friends that faced the additional heartbreak of not being able to gather in person for remembrance, not able to laugh and cry together. So, Delta be damned, today is a blessing. I know a few of you here today came to support me and my siblings as we remember our mom, and you may not have known her personally. So briefly, here are some key highlights from her 90 fully lived years. Carolyn Makepeace Killian was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1931, midway through the Great Depression. Her mother, Liz, and her father, James, celebrated her first birthday by writing a hysterical 9-page thesis explaining all the nicknames they had used for her during the previous 12 months. I found this treasure among her keepsakes a few weeks after she died. It begins, quote, "The year preceding her first birthday was a year of unabated accomplishment for our daughter. The immense task of reducing all her associates to a condition of complete obeisance and affection did not prevent her from achieving a fair degree of portability." And it gets funnier from there. Her first nickname, used before she was born, but continued with affection even after her birth, was It. There's an entire page explaining how It morphed from, quote, the ugliest of pronouns, end quote, to, quote, the cherished name of a dream child, end quote. At the top of page 5, they categorize 16 nicknames, followed by 4 pages of explanations of each. There are animal names, insect names, direct terms of sentiment and affection, and literary and historical allusions. The first 2 names in this last category are, I kid you not, Napoleon and Mussolini. Quote, the first two names in this group are purely descriptive. Our daughter's face unmistakably resembles Napoleon's at times, and at other times Mussolini's. It is quite remarkable that her face, so naturally and normally baby-like, with that fresh, bloom-like quality exclusive to babies, can square itself into a meditative Napoleonic pose or a determined, aggressive Mussolini look. But it does at times, and then those names are immediately applied. Whether her fleeting facial resemblances to these two autocrats are omens of good or bad is a question others than her parents may fret over. Come to think of it, her kids may have fretted over this from time to time. When Carolyn was 3, a brother was born, her only sibling, Ryan Meredith Killian. I haven't found Ryan's nickname list yet. Amazingly, you won't find Kit on my grandparents' list. My mom's school friends would eventually bestow the nickname that stuck. Kit Killian graduated from Wellesley High School and then Mount Holyoke College, class of 1952. Before marrying my dad in 1953, she got hired by IBM as a systems service representative, becoming one of the earliest non-secretarial female employees. As Kit and Paul started a family, Kit would occasionally help her dad, James, by accompanying him to important public events. You see, her mom, Liz, still only in her 40s, had a few moderate but difficult to recover from strokes, leaving her homebound at times. James had become president of MIT. When James hosted Winston Churchill at MIT's mid-century convocation in 1949, there was Kit by his side as they greeted the UK's legendary wartime prime minister. And when James was sworn in as our nation's first presidential science advisor, hoping to calm a nation panicked by Russia's new dominance in space with the launch of Sputnik, there was Kit again, standing across from President Eisenhower as the press cameras clicked. After my dad became a plant manager for Procter & Gamble, my parents never slowed down, moving 7 times back and forth around the country while having 4 kids. We finally settled in Berwyn in 1969, and Kit finally found time for personal interests. According to quite a few of her former students, she was a great math teacher that made it fun at Agnes Irwin. And she fell in love with this church and its congregants. After my parents divorced, my mom nabbed another guy. She and Walt Morris traveled the world together. You'll see a picture of Walt on the back of your program, filling 2 moving boxes of photo albums in just a dozen years. Sadly, we lost Walt in 2012, but my mom kept making new friends up until the very end, especially at Dunwoody Village, a community that she enthusiastically embraced with her glass always half full attitude. Kit Staley famously nursed friendships that lasted decades, and you'll hear from some of them when we open this hall to other comments after the family eulogies. My mom was looking forward to the memoir I recently finished writing, set for release in October. She was thrilled that her favorite cable news personality, Anderson Cooper, wrote a foreword for it. But here's the rub. There are some tough passages in the book covering a period of conflict between my mom and me. I hope those passages won't ruffle her closest friends. From what I've learned and come to know from her closest friends, they are as tough as she is. In a few chapters after, they will certainly recognize the woman that didn't flinch when her son came home and told her that he had AIDS-related complex and that he was gay. She surprised me with a level of love and support that lacked even a whiff of hesitation or regret, embracing my gayness in an almost celebratory way, exemplified by her joining the local PFLAG chapter. When I asked the Staleys to welcome my boyfriends into the family, each one often crazier than the one before, she led that effort. Every time I called, she'd start by asking, "How is Michael?" And then a year later, "How is Robert?" And then a year after that, "How is Kevin?" And then a few years after that, "How is Gary?" Years later, her refrain settled firmly on, "Gary was my favorite." For all her faults in mothering, she was there for me when it mattered most. When I see my brothers and sisters and sister, I can't help but see her as well. The same is true when I self-reflect. There she is. I am my mom's son, molded by her expectations, her optimism, and her progressive politics and empathy, but also molded by surviving her faults, and ultimately by the ebb and flow of her complicated love.
What a life my mother had. MIT, Long Beach, 2 husbands, and 1 3-mile harbor. How to measure it? For me, I look to my brothers and sister, my siblings. My mother was of the generation that saw the world change in an unprecedented way. Her generation, I believe, was the first generation to live with an expectation of emotional balance. The Second World War was won. The U.S. embodied the world's aspirations. But then things turned wrong. Vietnam, Watts, assassinations. We had security, but did we, in our core, have the right values? She accepted this challenge. She was a person of deep principle. She accepted the challenge of living to a standard of high values. My first memories as a child was going to the ghettos of Watts to spend a day a week with 4 black kids exploring LA. The social worker that had to approve my mom's efforts to change society said that there had to be at least 1 white kid in her effort to fight racism. And that was me. My mother's strengths were her values, and she pushed those values into the character of her children. When I think of my 2 brothers and my sister, what strikes me is their character, their values. They're humble. They believe to their core in empathy. They're compassionate. They are fair, and they are indeed kind. One of my strongest memories of my mother is of a camping trip we took up the west coast of the United States. We camped one summer from Long Beach, California, all the way to Vancouver, Canada. As a camper, my mother had one rule, and it was immutable. You leave the campsite better than you found it. We as kids would spend hours in search of the stray piece of paper to throw it away. We would restack the fire pit stones to perfection. I think she would smile if she reflected on the campsite that she left in my brother and sisters. Their character and values are clearly a more perfect campsite than we walked into. 3 Mile Island would be proud of its biggest fan.
I just want to say that my two brothers and sisters and I have no idea what each other were going to say. None of us shared anything with each other. I just want to thank you all for being here because I know how much this meant to Mom. My mother was a planner, and I have the document that she sent in 2003 with the songs that she wanted played. So that was 18 years ago. So this meant a lot to her. And I can't tell you, I know she is here in some way. And she is profoundly grateful that you are here as we are grateful that you're here. I too, I'll just quickly start, it's ironic, but with my mother's nickname, Kit. And I asked her several years ago, how did you get this nickname? And she said it came in junior high when one of her closest friends' mothers thought that my mom lived a bit on the wild side and was concerned how Carolyn might be influencing her daughter. She said my mother was like a wildcat. Some friends started teasing my mom and calling her Kitty. My mom quickly put a stop to that, and somehow Kit stuck. And I didn't know to share this or not, but I will. Once I was seeing a shrink, and the shrink suggested to me that to create some social distance from my mom, I call her Kit. And that went over like a lead balloon. She said, I'm your mother, call me Mom. As both Peter and Jess referred, my mom, our whole family moved at least 6 times, probably 7, from the time I was born till I was 14. From Boston to Long Beach, California, from Long Beach, California to Sacramento, from Sacramento to Kansas City, from Kansas City to Westfield, New Jersey, from Westfield back to Long Beach in California, and then finally from Long Beach, California to Philadelphia, to Berwyn. People go, why did you move so much? Well, back in the day, corporations, they thought to build leadership, corporations would move people continually, like Procter & Gamble, and my dad worked for Procter & Gamble. These moves were hard on our family, particularly my mom. And I remember her, just to get a break and have some time to rest, she would ask Jess to go and I to go outside. Please go outside. And I remember just going outside and finding an empty lot or the woods, and Jess and I would just play with sticks and stones and make things out of sticks and stones. And I really look back and think that's what led me to clay and work in clay. And I couldn't help but wonder about Jess. And I thought, sticks and stones? No wonder he went into finance. My mother was very attuned to what her children's interests were, and she knew I was interested in art. And when I was in 2nd grade, she enrolled me in art classes at the Nelson Atkins Art Museum in Kansas City, Missouri. And I couldn't help but reflect on the irony of 50 years later, they acquired a piece of mine for their permanent collection. And who would have known where things start? My mom believed deeply in social justice for all. And when we lived in California during the Watts riots, which occurred the summer of 1965, a year later, she asked me if I would be willing to participate in a new program where they wanted to integrate white and black students together in my 6th grade class. I said I would. And that year, I can still remember, African American students were bussed in from Watts, and I had an amazing year getting to know my 6th grade classmates on a deeply personal level. And I was proud to be in Mr. Pearlstein's class, and when we ate lunch, we all ate lunch together. And I can still remember some of their names, Brenda and Charles and Kevin, and I remember them as people, not by the color of their skin. My mother made that happen. I can remember my mother crying the day Martin Luther King was shot. On a lighter note, while growing up, Janet, Peter, Jess, and I would always have dinner at 6 o'clock. My father would get home, and towards the end of dinner, almost every time she would say, "Clean your plates. There are people starving in the world." On a side note, on a lighter note, when Jess and I were young, we used to wear cowboy boots, and these boots would flare at the top, and they were a great place to discreetly dump food that we didn't want to eat. Just one more page here. Although it didn't take Mom long to smell out week-old meatloaf in our boots, my mom was a force of nature. Sometimes when I think of her, it's like a tornado swirling with thoughts and memories. The last couple of weeks of her life, she kept saying, "I don't know what to do." I would say to Mom, "All you need to do is rest." But I finally asked her, "Mom, why do you keep saying, 'I don't know what to do'?" She said, "My father always told me to keep busy and active." And so too did she pass that message on to her children. This message is a mixed blessing, for it can also be healthy for the soul to go for a walk with no place to go, or simply just stare out a window and daydream. In life, we ask ourselves all sorts of profound questions. How do you define success? What do you really value? Do you live a life that maybe reflects those values? I suppose in one form or another, we all ask those questions, or maybe not. At the end of the day, what Kit valued most were family and friends. Many a wise person has said that when day is done, the most important thing in our lives are the relationships that we have with other people. My mom liked to discuss all sorts of things. And the seeker in me asks, how do we best express our love? By listening, being curious of others, act of service, gifts of time, gifts of humor, a hug, the list goes on. On a recent text message, I intended to write, "If I live as long as Mom, I have 23 years left to live." But what I mistakenly wrote was, "I have 23 years left to love." Maybe that's what I was meant to write. For the only thing that is eternal is love. And some say God is pure love. My mother so enjoyed her time at Dunwoody Retirement Community. My mom was a character, and for a while she selected movies for everyone to watch at Dunwoody, and they were called Kit's Picks. I remember when she first moved to Leland, for a period of time she had to wear a security bracelet because she would leave without signing out. But they wanted you to sign out before you left. And I remember once visiting her, and we were walking out to lunch, and we were walking in a highway, on one of the hallways at Dunwoody, and she was using her walker, and I could barely keep up. And then an alarm went off. And she said, "Come on, pick up the pace. We need to get out of here before they catch us." She'd forgotten to sign out. Towards the end of her life, I was surprised at how often she would say thank you to the Dunwoody staff. She was so grateful and thanked me for visiting her, and she seemed profoundly grateful in ways that I'd never seen. Even during the last days of her life, she never did lose that edge. I remember leaning over and kissing her, and she said, "You need a shave." In closing, the last 25 years or so of my mother's life, she would often end the phone conversation by saying, "I love you." Truth be told, it took me some years to get comfortable saying "I love you" back. And yet I noticed this past year, my mother was fading. And when saying goodbye, I was the first one to say, "Mom, I love you." May my mother rest in peace. Thank you.
I'm such a bundle of nerves. Normally, I would never speak at any public event, but I feel like I owe my mom gratitude for who I've become as an adult woman, having her as my mother. I feel beyond grateful that my mom and I grew so close during the last couple decades. I always thought we were two very different creatures, how we chose to live in the world. But we reached a place in our relationship that we could speak openly about our respective fears, anxieties, what we found joy in, etc. We learned how to open up to one another. There was a grace in our sharing. The last conversation I had with my mom, she kept repeating how similar we were. And I said back, I know, and it's so strange because no one would guess how similar in spirit we actually are. One of the greatest gifts my mom gave me was to learn how to lead any interaction with compassion and acceptance. Too often in this world, people seem to start at anger, fear, suspicion. I was probably most scared to be vulnerable with my mom, but I learned that she gave me the greatest comfort by simply being present with me, often without words.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tori. I'm one of Chris's daughters and one of Kit's granddaughters. I called my grandma Mom Kit. And, I think she occupied two roles in my life. She was the matriarch of the Staley clan. And as you've heard, she was a complicated matriarch of a complicated clan. But she was also my grandma. And in that, she was pretty uncomplicated. She showed her love from the moment I was born. My parents left me with her when I was a baby, and she let me play in the toilet because I loved water so much. My mother was not pleased with that one. She made my sister and I blueberry pancakes from scratch. Even when she got tired in her older age of making the pancakes, she would freeze them and keep them in the freezer for us when we wanted. She taught me how to play solitaire on her computer. She remembered that I loved the color purple. And when I couldn't say the color purple, I would say poiple. And even until my 24th birthday, she called me and said, "I got you something poiple, and I sent it to you." She knit me and my sister sweaters from scratch with all sorts of designs on them. My mom just took those out of the basement and saved them in boxes so that my sister and I could give them to our kids when we grow up. Whenever that happens. She loved 3 Mile with her whole heart, and it's my favorite place in the whole world. It's a place of nature and beauty and family. I got a tattoo of it, which she hated, but it'll be with me forever. Even when as anyone who knows my grandmother knows that she loved Bowdoin College, where my uncle and cousin and sister all went to college. And when I made the cardinal sin of choosing a public university over going to Bowdoin College, I was worried that maybe she wouldn't love me as much. And while I admit she didn't learn the UVM anthem quite as much as she knew the Bowdoin anthem, she came to my graduations and she sent me letters. And when I struggled a lot with anxiety in my sophomore year, She sent me a letter that her father had sent her in college. And even though my grandmother was someone who valued success and status and academic achievement, she underlined a portion of her father's letter that said, "Follow what you love." And I think my grandmother did that really well. And I hope that my sister and I and my cousins and her children can do that for as long as she did.
Good afternoon. I'm Vincent Craig. I'm the director of music here at the Mainline Unitarian Church. And before I play the next piece of music, I just wanted to share briefly the impact that Kit had on me when I first came to this congregation many years ago. And my predecessor, Ron Hockenberry, was a good friend of Kit's. And the first thing Ron did was he made sure that I was introduced to all the musicians in the church, because as you all know, those of you who attend here, that volunteer musicians make up a big part of what we do here on Sunday morning. And then, and you've got to meet Kit Staley. So not only did I get to meet Kit Staley, I became a regular dinner guest in her beautiful home in Berwyn. And she was really one of the people who kind of sold me on the church when I first started here, and just telling me more and more about the people here, and because she knew everyone. And she, at that time, was coordinating a whole battalion of volunteers. We used to have volunteer receptionists in the office, and she was the coordinator of that. And then she also had her own shift, so if I came in on one of her days, the phone still got answered, but we spent a lot of time catching up on what was new and exciting with me and with her. And to her 4 children, I know all about you, even though I don't know you very well, and I've only met you a few times over these many years, but Kit spoke so eloquently and so lovingly about all of her children. And it's kind of nice to know that when we gather in a situation like this, it's because in one way or another we have all been beneficiaries of a life well spent. And I think Kit would be so pleased to know that so many of you came out to celebrate her life today. Thank you.
When Vincent told me that Kit had asked for I Would Be True, some of you may have recognized that hymn tune, at her service, I was floored because it's the first hymn I learned growing up in a little Unitarian fellowship out of the old blue paperback Unitarian fellowship hymnal. And the words, for those of you who don't know the first verse, are so fitting from everything we've heard this morning. I would be true, for there are those who trust me. I would be pure, for there are those who care. I would be strong, for there is much to suffer. I would be brave, for there is much to dare. I would be friend to all the foe, the friendless. I would be giving and forget the gift. I would be humble, for I know my weakness. I would look up and laugh and love and lift. There are other verses, but those are the two I grew up singing. And I wish we could have sung them together today, but they're very fitting. Thank you, Dr. Craig, for that rendition. We do want to take some time to hear from some of you, because I know there are many people here with stories and memories about Kit. So two of her granddaughters, Sophia and Tori, are going to have microphones, and we'll be moving about the sanctuary. And I do ask you to remember that there be maybe quite a few people who would like to say a word or two, so please do keep your sharing brief. But we'd like you to just rise where you are to speak rather than moving about, if you are able to rise. And if you will raise your hand if you wish to speak, I'll direct the microphone carriers to you. Here on the aisle in the white jacket. And then, we'll come to you next, okay?
Testing, is the mic on?
Oh, and please do tell us who you are
I
before
will.
you speak.
I'm Norma Winther, and Kit and I have been friends for over 50 years. I had some prepared remarks that I wanted to mention today, but listening to the family speak, I'd like to say something else. The speeches given by Kit's 3 sons and 1 daughter reflect Kit. You all have such different personalities. You all had a different aspect of life to discuss, and all of you are reflecting your mother. To me, it was wonderful summation of the life of someone whom I knew very well. Kit and I went to Russia together about 8 years ago. Russia was not on Kit's bucket list. She liked animals and Africa. Russia somehow was not her choice. But being adventuresome and wanting to help me, I needed a roommate. She chose to go with me. It was not her best trip. It was hard on her physically. And on the way home, she said, well, that's my last overseas trip. Very typical of Kit. She did not make statements, she made declarations. She no longer would travel overseas, and she did not. When her partner, Walter, died, she asked me about funeral arrangements and decided to use the same arrangements that I had used for my husband. Walter's ashes are buried adjacent to my husband's in our church memorial ground. And at the time, Kit and I kidded about how Kit followed me to Dunwoody Village, and someday we would follow one another to the memorial ground in our church. Well, it's Kit's turn, and I will miss her. She was a good friend. Thank you.
Thank you, and let's go right across the aisle if we could, yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Marcia Seifert, and Kit and I met at a Mount Holyoke function 50 years ago. We both graduated from Mount Holyoke, and we shared a love for that revered college. Kit and I had a wonderful friendship, which was warm, caring, enriching, and lots of fun. Now, how do you describe Kit Staley? She was passionate, interesting, headstrong, gregarious, worldly, opinionated, caring, stubborn, appreciative, intelligent, and obstinate, optimistic, liberal, and very charitable, giving generously to causes in which she believed. Kit loved to travel. It was part of her DNA. And we had the most wonderful experience and opportunity to travel together abroad. Let me take a minute, even though you told me to be brief, those who know me said that it's impossible for me to be so, to tell a few little stories about our trip. We went to Austria, and we went to Kitzbühel, and we checked into the hotel, and then we were hungry, and went out and turned left, looking for a place to have lunch. We finally came to a place called the Cafe Kit, and we walked in, and she said, "I always order soup." Well, I speak some German, and so I looked at the menu and recognized a couple of words, and when the waitress came over, I pointed to a part of the menu and said, "I'll have that." Well, Kit's soup came, and my mashed potato sandwich came as well. When we had dinner that night, we turned to the right. And had we done that at lunch, we would have found any number of restaurants where we could have had a repast. We chose one, and we went in, and I ordered something called Wiener Backhuhn, which is one of my favorite dishes, a piece of chicken, lightly breaded, and came from Vienna. Well, the chicken came with accompaniments, and it was a huge portion. I wasn't able to finish. But Kit was treating me to that dinner, and she said, "Ask the waitress for a doggy bag." Well, I said, "Kit, you don't take doggy bags in Europe." She said, "I don't care. Ask the waitress for a doggy bag." Well, I did. And she put the piece of chicken in the doggy bag, and I carried it around for the next 3 days to every stop we made. And then I finally left it on a balcony at one of our hotels. The last quick story I will tell you is when we went to Montalcino in Tuscany in Italy. And that's a wonderful small little town. We went up to the town one evening, and we were walking along the street. We had a car, so we drove up to the town. We were looking for a place to park. And she said, "I'll stay up here on the street, but there's a parking space down that hill." So I went down the hill while she stayed up on the street, and when I got down to the hill, I was faced with a long flight of steps. Well, there was no parking space there, and I had no way of turning around, so she called me, "Just back up, and I'll stop traffic." So very slowly, I backed up, and here was Kit on the main road going, "Stop. Stop, stop," so that I was able to get up and finally find a space. Kit loved to read the New York Times, and she read it from cover to cover every day. She often would say, "Those who do not read the New York Times aren't educated." I thought she was speaking about me. I admire Kit for her equanimity in the face of adversity, and her ability to accept things as they were and not as she wished them to be. Kit, you have left an indelible imprint on my soul. Thank you, bless you, and sayonara.
Thank you. Are there other folks who would like to share a memory or a story?
I'm Kate Staley, married to Chris, the oldest son, and I thought I would share a story that Kit loved to tell herself. So I met Kit actually before I met certainly before I met Chris, but before I met any of the, I'll move out here, to the Staley kids. And because my mother, at one point after Kit and Paul got divorced, she ran what was called a corporate bed and breakfast at the time. So you'd have one long-term guest. And it happened that as I was graduating college, my mother was doing a kind of 9-month gig here in Philadelphia, didn't want to stay in a hotel, and ended up at Kit's place. And they quickly found out they both went to Mount Holyoke, they connected with Marcia, they had all sorts of things in common. And as I graduated in the middle of the year, I was thinking about working with horses, and this is a great horse area. So I ended up coming, and I met Kit that way. In the end, I didn't stay, so we met on a bunch of different weekends while I was looking for a job. But I was very impressed with Kit. She seemed very entrepreneurial, was starting this corporate bed and breakfast, and she was a great cook. She always had soups on the stove in the middle of winter. She was an amazing cook, if you don't know that about her. And I was just very impressed. She was very lively and gregarious and all the things that people have been speaking about her. And then, of course, I heard about these children, an oldest son in Wichita, studying and teaching ceramics, Jess in New York, Janet, the daughter, and then Peter, the son, was gay and an activist and all these things. And so flash forward a couple years, I was living in my mom's apartment, New York rent being what it was, just on the cusp of about to move out from my own apartment. And my mother woke me up one morning and she's like, Chris Staley's on the phone and he wants to take you out to brunch. And I was like, who? And I just couldn't even, and all I could think of was like, well, there's a married brother and a gay brother. Like, why would either want to take me out to brunch? And then she was like, no, there's the other brother. And I was like, oh, okay. And so anyways, Chris and I met the next day, and it was the start of our relationship, and for which Kit adored the fact that she was, the kind of the element that brought us together, and constantly talked about it and always reminded us. And of course, I will be forever grateful for the fact that she brought us together. And just a few other words about her. She was a great grandmother. She really did knit all these incredibly beautiful baby sweaters, which I just dry cleaned, and it was so neat to kind of revisit them and to think about the years that she knitted those and how much I treasured those. She was one of the first people that said to me, you don't need all those fancy toys for kids, just throw some pots and pans on the ground, which she would do inevitably when I brought the children to visit her. So, and then she introduced our family, she'd already introduced her kids, but to 3 Mile, to this place in Lake Winnipesaukee, which has really become one of the cornerstones of our family and how we spend a week every summer. So, I will miss Kit. She was an amazing woman, complicated woman in many ways, but somebody that I'm so glad entered my life, and so many gifts came from her.
Are there other memories or stories waiting to be shared? That's all right.
It's hard for me. I was sort of starting this. My children were sort of, the youngest was probably 6 or 7 or 8, and I thought, oh, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? So it turned out I was going to, decided to go into teaching, and I did student teaching at, wasn't Valley Forge, TE, thank you. TE Junior High, because that's where my kids would go eventually. And so teach, the fall of '79, and in those days, maybe it was sort of a drinking department, and we had a Christmas party after, and at the Cracked Pot, was that what it was, Cracked Pot? Anyway, someplace up there. She was part of it. And Kit had just started teaching at Irwin's in September, but she had been there, and so they had asked her back. So, cha-cha-cha, well, what do you want to do? I don't know. I guess I'll try and get a job. Oh, well, Irwin's is looking for a job. Oh, okay. So I sent my little pathetic, hand-typed little resume, and there you are. They would have, in all fairness, have hired a dog because they were desperate for somebody, and here was a college graduate and a math major, so I think they were thrilled with me, but still. And it was the beginning of a long, long friendship. And she reintroduced me to 3 Mile Island and how much we all love that. Lovely place. And I adored Walter, too.
What else? Okay. Thank you all so much. And I'll just remind you that it's in remembering the stories about the people that we know and love that we really keep them alive in our hearts. So over the days and months and years to come, I hope you will remember those stories and share them with each other, share them with Kit's family, and keep those memories vitally alive. Kit loved the prayer of St. Francis, and she specifically asked that it be part of her memorial service. It's a prayer that is beloved of many of us, and it calls us to those classic spiritual ideals of love and service that were so important to her. So I share it with you now. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. And where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen. Today we have remembered together a woman of great energy and spirit, compassion and commitment. And she is still very much with us, alive in our minds and hearts, challenging and inspiring us. We can best honor the gifts of her life by living them out and passing them on. So if you have an issue that you care deeply about, get involved and speak up. Be a voice for the marginalized. Encourage people to reach their full potential. Stay engaged and informed about the world. And most of all, reflect on your own passions and values and make sure that your life reflects them the way you want them to. The family hopes that you'll stay after the service for refreshments and a time to continue sharing memories and stories and fellowship together. So I invite you to enjoy the postlude from Dr. Craig and then join us outside under the tent where you are welcome to remove your masks to continue in fellowship together. And now please receive the benediction. We have gathered in love. May we go forth in love. And may the spirit of love, which overcomes all differences, which heals all wounds, which puts to flight all fears, and which reconciles all who are separated, be in us and among us, now and always. Amen.
Thank you.